Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm Brad Bell, William J. Conady Professor of Strategic Human Resources in the ILR School at Cornell University. I also serve as the director of our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, or CAHRS. I'm very excited to be joined today by my colleagues Chris Collins and Kevin Cox for the third keynote in our 5-part series on the CAHRS World-Class HR Business Partner Framework. In today's keynote, we will examine the crucial role that HRBPs play in managing the performance of key talent segments, in particular, leaders and critical role talent. As part of today's discussion, we will explore the different ways in which HRBPs can effectively manage these groups to have the biggest impact on business unit results. We'll also provide some tips and ideas on ways that you can develop your capabilities in this area. We hope to have some time remaining at the end of today's session for some Q&A, so encourage you to submit your questions and thoughts at any point during today's keynote. Before diving in, I'd like to introduce our two guests. So here in the studio today, I'm joined by my colleague Chris Collins, who is a professor of human resource studies in the ILR School at Cornell. Chris is a former director of CAHRS and currently serves as the director of our Master's in Industrial and Labor Relations graduate program. Chris has done a lot of teaching in the area of HR leadership, which connects to a lot of the ideas we'll be talking about today. And joining us remotely is Kevin Cox, who is the founder and president of LKC Advisory, and who is also currently serving as a CAHRS Executive Fellow. Kevin retired last year as GE's CHRO and previously served as CHRO of American Express and Pepsi Bottling Group. Kevin continues to be very active in the field, not only with CAHRS, but a variety of other HR organizations, including the National Academy of Human Resources and Gartner's CHRO Leadership Board. So to kick off today's session, we're going to be focusing today, again, as I mentioned, on talent and leadership. So to get things started, we would like to show a short video that features several CHROs that currently sit on the CAHRS Advisory Board. These CHROs are highly regarded HR leaders that span multiple industries. And today we asked them to share their thoughts on what they see as the role of HR business partners in ensuring the right talent and leadership are in place in their organizations. So let's hear what they had to say.
The other thing I want my most talented HR business partners to be doing is to be thinking about how to future skill their organizations. This has been something that HR business partners have always done, but it's a different kind of way to look around the corners of what skills you're going to need in the future and be ready for it. With technology changing as fast as it is and different skills coming online every day that people need, really getting in front of that and making sure that organizations are prepared when the time comes is going to be something that my most talented HR business partners are going to get a handle on.
What business leaders are looking for that I talk with, and I've just finished a listening tour over the last 100 days, talking to all of the leaders of the company, the top 300 or so, and they're really looking for HR partners that understand them, understand their teams, understand their business, and can help them figure out what the talent priorities are for their business, how to grow those talent priorities. In some cases, there could be groups where we have a new skill that we're going to need for executing on our 5-year plan that we as a company haven't historically had. They're looking for their business or HR partner to build that out. They're looking for their business HR partner to be a voice of reason and a voice of truth for them as leaders, for helping them grow or get some insight on how their team's effectiveness can be improved upon.
HR business partners, they've always been very strategic partners to the business, right? But I think now more than ever, we've seen them really become integrated, very involved across the enterprise. In a lot of ways, I think technology has allowed this to happen, where they can spend more time really with the business leaders. And I think the needs have brought it to where it needs to be that way. So instead of just delivering, talent practices like delivering comp or delivering succession planning, I think business partners now are shaping comprehensive talent strategies, right, that are really deeply aligned with the business strategies. And internally here, we talk a lot about an East-West mindset, right? Building relationships that go all the way across the business, understanding how do we evolve our workforce to drive success and growth. And we want to do that across the entire business, not just within silos. And HR business partners are really uniquely and beautifully positioned to be able to do that. They serve like a quarterback, right, for us, our people and purpose function. on what the business needs and what is going to add value for the business. Proactive, being proactive on talent needs, on what's happening in the organization with risks, turnover gaps, those kind of things, and provide solutions before the actual problems emerge. So not the reactive version of things in the past.
So lots of great ideas in those videos. And Kevin and Chris, I'd love to get your reactions. Kevin, maybe I'll start with you. What resonated the most in terms of what you heard there from Jennifer, Christy, and Ashley?
Hey, Brad. Hey, Chris. It's good to be with you all again. First of all, I feel like I just want to say those are three terrific heads of HR. I had a chance to work with Jennifer at American Express. Christy and I worked together a long time ago at Pepsi, and Ashley and I have been on a number of boards together. And so we can learn a lot from all that they have to say. They really are great representation of what this function and what leadership looks like. I think Jennifer talked about future skills. And you cannot pick up anything wherever you get your news without thinking about the dynamic nature of work right now and AI in particular. So the future skills, what kind of got you here won't necessarily get you there. I think that resonated with me a lot. Christy talked about we are the voice of reason or the voice of truth. We're sometimes a mirror that we hold up to the organization about the quality of leadership and the standards that we have. I think we'll talk a lot about that on this call. And then Ashley, I love this east-west orientation. I think she called it the quarterback. The need to integrate and not to be so vertically siloed, which is kind of the default option for lots of big companies. I love the fact that she thinks about the HRBP role as needing to integrate things more horizontally and go against the vertical tendencies of a company. So those are a couple of the thoughts I took away. Brad?
Great, thanks, Kevin. How about Chris, from your standpoint?
Yeah, so one of the things that stood out to me for both, I think it's Ashley and Christy's comments, really hit on this idea of risk. And so when we talk about this particular lever around talent, we're really thinking about individuals. And there's lots of risk inherent in organizations tied to individuals, and our ability to know where they are mentally. Are they checking out? Are they thinking about leaving? Do we have ready successors? Have we built the skills we need for the next leadership dynamic to really succeed? Do we have the right next technical talent? So all those risks are things that we as HRBPs can spot because we're on the ground, where at corporate, you're seeing things at a much higher level. You're seeing things in aggregate. So this ability to really know the key players, whether those are leaders or technical talent, and where do they sit, what are the risks inherent with those specific people, super critical for success of the business.
Great, so it seems very clear that this is a critical part of the HRBP role. So why don't we dig into this lever in a bit more detail. So again, if we bring up the model, the framework, today we're really focusing on that talent and leadership lever. And as you can see, it's broken into two main components. The first of which is this piece around leadership excellence. So Kevin, I'd love to come back to you and have you talk a little bit about, what do you see as a role that HRBPs play in ensuring leadership excellence, and specifically, what are some of the key processes and actions that they need to be engaging in to really support their efforts in this area?
Brad, when I think about the leadership excellence block there on the model, on the framework, in one word, I would say it is leadership excellence equals standards. I think that's what we're really talking about there. And it's one of the areas where I think the HRBP role and actually the CHRO role have a lot of overlap. When I was CHRO at these companies, I thought like my fundamental first principle reason for being there was to put the strongest team on the field relative to our game plan. Whatever our strategy or our business model was, put the strongest team possible on the field to be able to kind of win that particular game. And the best HRBPs I've ever worked with, had a chance to lead, what I tried to do when I was one, or even, Brad, not just HRBPs, even country leaders or division leaders of HR, they take leadership really, really personally. If people are in critical roles, and I think Chris is going to talk about that a little bit later, if they're in critical roles and are not meeting the standard, HRBPs who are doing the job really, really well will take action to make sure changes are made. They either coach that critical talent up to standard, or in some cases, they make the difficult but necessary choice to exchange or to replace that talent. But it's all, to me, starting with they're the standard keepers. Whatever culture you're in promises a particular brand of leadership. When I was at GE, the leadership values that we talked about a lot there were humility and transparency and focus. Those were three things that we defined as our brand of leadership in the newer GE. But if you don't have one, you can go back to what I would say the classic definition of leadership is. You're looking for leaders who set the agenda, they bring others with them, and they do it the right way. And so to me, when you make that promise through your culture to an organization, our job as HRBPs is to guarantee that we're actually executing and that we're sort of living up to that expression and that standard. So I think about us in a nutshell as kind of the guarantor of that brand of leadership for our unit. And Brad, you talked a little bit about key processes. And I'm a big fan of processes. Sometimes I think HRBPs, the last session, we talked about trauma surgeons and things like that. Now I'd like to talk about us as kind of engineers. We are kind of looking at different parts of the process to see what those gauges say and whether those parts of the processes are working like they were built to work. Talent acquisition is the first one. Even though HRBPs don't usually run the talent acquisition process, I think they're the engineers that check, is the flow where you need it to be? Is the quality of the product coming through the top talent pipeline where it needs to be? If it isn't, our job is to escalate, put pressure on our TA colleagues and get that to change. Secondly, the talent review process. Game plan, org review, whatever you might call it in your company. That's another process where HRBPs have a very strong responsibility to call it like we see it and to make sure that what's represented in those talent reviews are, again, standards on display. Are people meeting those standards? If not, what are we doing about it? If people are exceeding those standards, are we in a position to export talent or promote that talent or really put them to higher and better use within the organization? So we've got a big role to play there. And the last one I'll talk about is goal setting or performance management. It's where you, in my mind, make sure that your pay is really aligned to your performance. And again, you're rewarding the people that are really contributing at the highest possible level, and that you're making sure people who are not yet performing where they need to are being compensated accordingly. And I don't believe that that's the job of the total rewards team. I think that's the HRBP's role, again, because it's another measure of your leadership standards and what you're putting out there. So HRBPs have a tremendous amount of responsibility and leverage and opportunity to make a company stronger by looking hard at this particular part of the framework. Brad?
So Kevin, it sounds like an exciting place for HRBPs to play. I'm sure a lot of them really like working in this space. It also sounds to me like this is a area maybe with some landmines or at least some potential risk involved. So, as HRBPs look to really drive leadership excellence, any words of caution or advice that you would offer them?
It's another overlap, I think, between an HRBP role and a CHRO role. We CHROs often talk amongst ourselves. It can be a very lonely job, because you are often taking positions that are necessary, but they're far from popular. You're speaking truth to power more often than lots of your colleagues are. And sometimes that works. A lot of times that's a very difficult thing to do. So I think the single biggest caution light that I'd point out, Brad, is it's the alignment with the leadership team of the unit or the function or the area you're supporting. You want to make sure you have as much alignment as you possibly can, and that you use all of your influence skills to get that alignment. Sometimes you'll need to be convinced, and you should be. And a lot of times you'll need to convince the leadership that they need to think about this and see it a different way. The best HRBPs that I've worked with, right now I'm thinking about a particular person I worked with at GE. He is tough, He is demanding. He's not afraid to put his point of view on the table, even when it's not popular or welcome. But he uses data, he uses facts, not just his opinion to support his point. And he also knows how to, what I'd say, work the back room like a real champ. He doesn't just stand up in meetings and take on these unpopular positions. He works the room. He works the room before the meeting and sometimes after the meeting to make sure that they're considering his point of view. Lastly, he does not do it. In fact, he's one of the more humble leaders I've ever had a chance to work with. He does not do it for his own glory. He's not looking for credit. He's just wanting to win. He's wanting the team that he supports to win. And I think that's the reason, Brad, that they listen to him and that they frankly follow him far more often than they don't. But this concept of alignment is tricky. It's important, but it is something you can practice, and it is something that the greatest HRBPs I've ever worked with do really, really well.
Great words of advice. Thanks, Kevin. So in the second here, I'm going to go to Chris to break down the other part of this lever. But again, we'd like to remind all of you that we hope to take a few questions before we wrap here in 10, 15 minutes. So again, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please submit them in the chat. So Chris, I want to come to you next to speak on the other component of the talent and leadership lever, which is around critical role talent. So, the first question that many people out there might have is, why single out critical role talent versus all other non-leadership talent? And again, similar to, what I asked Kevin, as HRBPs really look to ensure that these critical roles are being filled with the best people that consistently drive results, what should they be thinking about or doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back a little bit to Kevin's points, which is leadership definitely matters, right? So having the right leadership team in place is absolutely critical if we're going to achieve success. I think what happens, though, for some HRBPs, and you raised the question, is that becomes super alluring. Like being on the one with the insider info with the leadership, building that relationship with a senior leader of the organization can be really kind of overwhelmingly attractive to do that work. And so I think people then tend to forget the rest of the organization exists, or they try and peanut butter their time over every job. And what we clearly know is there are some people that are individual contributors that drive more value than others. So when I think about this critical role thing, I think you could look at it in multiple ways. So depending on the kind of organization you support, if I'm supporting a sales organization or a technology organization, I might be thinking about this critical role in terms of individuals who are the stars of the organization, who are overwhelmingly create more value because of the brain power they bring or their capabilities in that role, that, knowing who they are, making sure that we've got them aligned to drive the right results, that there are replacements for them so that we're not tied to them in case they leave, that it gives us more degrees of freedom. I think a different way to look at it sometimes is like in a larger organization that I might be supporting with different kinds of roles is really figuring out which of those roles are the ones that are most critical, and then how do we have the right A players in those critical roles. And then I think the hidden talent sometimes might be what I think of as the glue player on a team, the one that might be the social connection between all the key people, might be that person that really funnels the knowledge sharing between key members. They might be the kind of unknown leader of the group that influences others, that really drives the culture. I think each one of those takes the initiative of the HRBP to go figure out what those roles look like in their company. Who are those people that are these superstars or key nodes? How do you get to know them? Think about who's going to succeed them. How do you transfer some of their skills and capabilities over time? So you've got more balance to the larger team.
One of the things that struck me in the video that we showed earlier was the idea of HRBPs in this talent space really having to be looking ahead, really thinking about how are skills changing, thinking about what are those future risks that they might be facing. At the same time, we know that HRBPs are often dealing with day-to-day fires, right? I mean, particularly in the talent space, one of the people in these critical roles get poached away by a competitor, somebody retires, whatever it might be. So, what advice can you offer HRBPs on how to balance that need to be focusing on the present versus also having an eye towards the future as they think about talent strategy?
Yeah, I thought Ashley, again, brought that up nicely to really be thinking about, the having this understanding of where risk sits. So again, this goes back to the idea of, do I know who those key players are, the key roles are? How might that be changing the future? I don't think the future changes every day, right? So this idea that every day I've got to be scanning for the future, that is a reflection point to me, that maybe every few months you're really rethinking how is the world around us changing? How much faster has AI moved, or how much faster has this new competitor entered in our market, and how we're going to respond to that? So that's more of a periodic reflection to me. I do think sometimes we can over tilt to every day I've got to think about what's next and what's new. That's just not true. Like, most industries aren't moving at the speed of light. They're moving fast, but not so fast that I have to do it every day. So I think it's a balance of most of my time maybe spent on today, with periodic days, once a month, once every 2 months, where I'm really stepping back to look at what's changing on the horizon and how are we reacting to get ahead of that, versus it hitting us because we never saw it coming.
I think what I'm hearing you suggest too is, I think the risk is getting too focused on just today and forgetting about tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just focusing on all those fires that we're dealing with today, and then something all of a sudden pops up on your radar that you haven't thought about. So stepping back every once in a while to really think about the future is valuable. So again, I know many of you probably watching today are either in HRBP roles or maybe are aspiring to be an HRBP one day. So, do want to kind of tap into Chris and Kevin's expertise to get some thoughts on, as you look to really build out your capabilities in this area of talent and leadership, what are some things that you could be doing or starting to think about? So, Kevin, I'll come back to you. What advice would you offer for those that are really looking to strengthen, their competency in this area of talent and leadership?
Well, I probably like you and Chris, I've been really impressed by some of the comments that I've picked up on LinkedIn and whatnot from those of you who followed the first couple episodes of this. I can tell it's a very active learning community, and I really think that's bodes well for the future of the function. First thing I would say is become a world-class interviewer. And to be frank, when I was in the earlier parts of my career, I didn't particularly like to interview, and I don't think I was particularly good at it. But I decided that this was going to be a very important skill I needed to master. So I set out to try to be better at that. So I read and I studied, and I think I became a pretty good interviewer. And I do understand interviewing is still a little bit better than flipping a coin. So we have to put it in its perspective. But I think we can be a lot better at that than we can, whether that's internal interviews or external interviews. The best book that I've ever read, and I would say this changed my view on interviewing 180 degrees. The book is called Who by Randy Street and Jeff Smart. And it changed forever the way I think about interviewing. It talked about 5 questions that you can ask that can really get to the heart of the matter. This was way before AI. Now you all have your favorite LLMs to help you do that. But and I think we can drop the link in the chat there. But that one book really made me a far stronger interviewer than I was. So that's tip number 1, Brad. Number 2 is consider being certified in some form of assessment. There are lots of you that probably get certified in coaching, which is a good thing to do. But I think the name of the game might actually be to be better at assessing talent, again, internal or external, so that you have something to add more than just your opinion based on an interview. Now, the Hogan assessment, and none of them are perfect, but the Hogan assessment is my system of choice. I became certified in how to administer a Hogan and how to interpret a Hogan. And that's something that you might find your organization will support you doing. But again, it will really help you think differently about talent, about potential, about style, capability, personality, derailers, motives, all those factors. So tip number 2 is consider being certified in something like that. Tip number 3 is follow Mark Effron, and that's spelled Effron. And for years, Mark's been a really grumpy critic of HR, rightfully pointing out, in my opinion, that we overcomplicate talent management. Years ago, he wrote a book called One Page Talent Management with Miriam Ort. And I think that book, again, is a symbol of how to think about talent management in the simplest, clearest, and cleanest way. And I think it stands the test of time. I still go back and look at it and am inspired by the clarity of Mark's thinking. So if part of your role as an HRBP is talent and leadership, know how to interview, know how to assess, know how to manage that talent. And the last one I would say is another book by a good friend of mine. His name is Dan Ciampa, Ciampa. He wrote a book years ago called Right from the Start. He co-wrote that with Michael Watkins. Michael went off to write the follow-up book to that, The First 90 Days. But Right from the Start is an excellent study in culture, in leadership. Dan and Michael studied leaders, CEOs who moved from one company to the next, and what was there to learn about their successes or their failures. So as you can see, I don't think you ever stop learning. If you graduated with your degree in HR, terrific, but this world is changing too quick to not look for outside resources. None of this is very expensive. All of it's just a function of how you spend your time. But those would be some tips I would suggest, Brad.
All great recommendations, Kevin. I might read some of those books myself. Chris, how about from your standpoint? What other recommendations would you offer?
So I think the first one, and I meant to mention this in the session 2 we did, is this is why we think so highly of Kevin, is he's curious, right? So how do you get better in this HRBP role is you got to go learn, right? And so if you're weak on assessment, if you're weak on understanding how to build leaders, if you're weak on how do I give feedback to help those leaders get better, how do I coach those leaders, you got to go learn, whether that's investing in yourself in a learning certificate or an assessment certificate or whatever that might be. You should constantly be updating your skill set. The second part of this is most of this talent stuff is about time, right? Have I spent the time to actually get to know those leaders, really know what makes them tick, understand where their fears are, where they've got weaknesses? Same thing with a critical role. Like if I know that this is my superstar and losing this person, losing him or her is really going to impact our business, how well do I know their motivation? Do I know why they're tied and connected to this organization? How do we keep them embedded? So I think so much of that is about taking the time to get to know these people as individuals, because you can't manage individuals if you don't actually know what makes them tick. So that to me is purely, do I invest the time to really get to know key leaders and key talent?
Great advice. So I think we have a few minutes before we wrap up, maybe to take a couple questions. And I see one that's come in from Alex, relates to this idea of kind of developing capability in this space, but specifically asks, any recommendations on how to train a newer HRBP, someone that's new in this role, on how to really absorb these skills or to develop in this area. So maybe Kevin, I'll come back to you. Where would you start if you have a newer HRBP, you really want them to develop in this talent and leadership space? Where would you kind of plug them in, or what types of experiences would you maybe start with?
I think sometimes we make this more complicated than it needs to be, Brad. I loved Chris's point that at the end of the day, it really is about time. Chris, I could not agree with you any more. So the first thing I would do with the newer HRBP is I would spend time talking to them about what does your day look like? What does your model week look like? And where are you spending your time? Because I believe if you point generally bright, generally well-intended people at the right targets, most of them will deliver for you. And so, but these jobs, as I think you said, Brad, there are 100 things going on that are frankly distractions. So I think you get leverage by saying, what is the role? That's the whole reason that the three of us really tried to build this framework. What does the role look like when it's done well? Make sure they understand that, and then take a really hard look at their calendar with them. Where are you spending your time? Where should you spend a little bit more? Where will I give you permission to spend a little bit less? And then see what those gaps are and look to close it. That's my thought. Chris, additions to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I would also say that, particularly in organizations, as you're trying to grow talent faster, because if we look at the function of HR, there's not nearly as many of those jobs where people cut their teeth relative to 20 years ago, right? We've just leaned out the HR function. So there's big jumps now between jobs. I think one great practice I've seen with companies is doing some collective learning together, with whether that's taking a case internally that was developed, taking a look at here's some key leaders and let's sit and assess them together. So we really have some way to calibrate how do we go about the assessment, what are the standards we're holding them accountable for, how do we now deliver some coaching or feedback back to that group learning where you can kind of skilled people can pull people up, we can get a better sense of learning across the group. I just think that's a great internal practice for companies to do.
Yeah, that's great. So another question here, and Chris, I'll start with you. This is from Agustina. And I know this, you teach this a lot. How do you develop trust and influence with executive business leaders? And she specifically asked in the context of maybe a more remote global organization. Maybe it's different remotely, but I know you focus a lot on this kind of trust and influence, piece.
Yeah. So as much as technology has changed, my core belief is that humans haven't. We just don't evolve that quickly. I think so much of trust is about the relationship. So how well do they know you? How well do they understand what your intentions are? That you're here for them and the organization to succeed. That example Kevin gave with the leader on his team from GE, where they are able to convince people or to listen to them because they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it for the team to win. But people have to know that about you. If you just piloted in and got dropped off, no one knows you. So you got to spend that time. Part of that trust is delivering results, and that when you do say things, they can see that it emerges over time. Like your willingness to say things, but then it turns out to be true that you did it for the right reason. It's over time that you build these relationships. And I think if you're remote, my personal belief is you do what Christy was talking about, and you go do this listening tour and you go meet them in person. That I think you have to spend the time.
So a related question, Kevin, that I'm going to bring to you from Hillary. She must know you because she says, I remember you talked about courage as one of the most critical skills for an HR leader. Can you talk about instances where an HRBP really has to have that courage, even though they know it's going to, something they're doing in this talent leadership space is going to cause some tension and friction? And I think you alluded to that, a bit earlier.
Well, I love talking about courage. So cut me off, Brad, when I go too long. Thank you, Hillary, for the lead on that. First of all, I think you need to choose to be courageous about the right things. That's in a phrase, pick your spots. I think it is easy to be critical about what's not right in an organization. I've always tried to put myself in the position of general managers or CEOs. They have a lot that they're trying to manage. So if you're going to be courageous about things that matter and things that make a big difference. That's my first principle. The second one is you can't make it about you. You can't turn this into a credit-seeking exercise or some sort of a sacrificing, throwing your badge on the table kind of moment. When you do that, I think it's more about hubris than it is about courage. It's more about you and your pride or your ego. And people have a very, very keen nose for sniffing that sort of thing out. So be courageous for the right reasons on the right things. The last thing that I always tell myself, it's from an old movie. I ask myself, what are you prepared to do, Kevin, on this problem? Before I get into it, I say, what are you prepared to do? How far am I prepared to go? And I think about that before I have my conversation, not in the middle of it, which is sort of like driving a car. Either stop at the red light, run through the red light, but don't go halfway and sort of think, I wonder if I should go faster. That's how you get hurt. So I try to think about that on the front end and be pretty planful about that and know how far I'm willing to take something based on how important it is and how much it really matters. The rest of it is technique and it comes with practice. It is not easy to do. But by the way, I think introverted people can do that just as easily as extroverted people, sometimes better. I just think you have to do it in the context of the culture you're working in, both in the company and sometimes parts of the world, and do it properly.
Just to tag onto that really quickly is I love all those points. I think adding to that is sometimes to be courageous, you need to practice it, right? So that's where having your peers, maybe from outside the company where you can share things in secret, or if you have a mentor inside, to practice that courageous conversation before you have it, because just getting those words out sometimes is hard. The other part to that, which Kevin and I have talked a lot about, is we don't always have to be the face of courage. Can we have the conversation with a person whose courageous stand would actually have more impact? Sometimes is better, right? So we don't always have to be the face of courage. That idea of how can I influence the person who's most impactful, most likely to be impactful with courage, to get them to help speak up, I think is part of this idea of courage that we have to think about.
All great advice for those that are looking to develop in this area. We're about up on our time, so just a few quick reminders before we wrap up. Again, this is a series, so we'll be coming back on December 2nd for our fourth keynote in the series. And during that session, we'll be doing a deep dive into another lever of the framework. This one focuses on organizational effectiveness. And in particular, we'll be examining the key capabilities that HRBPs need to not only drive execution and productivity, but also to facilitate change and transformation. Certainly an important topic for organizations today, given the dynamic world in which we're living in. Again, I would encourage all of you to, if you haven't already, visit the landing page. We'll put in that into the chat as well. There you can view the recordings of these sessions. You can download the framework. We encourage you to share all of it with anyone in your networks that you think may be interested. We really want this to be used widely and often, so please use it yourself and share as well. And as we continue to develop future resources around this framework, we'll be posting them to that landing page, so please do come back and visit it regularly. Again, we'd like to thank both Chris and Kevin for joining us today, and we hope that all of you will come back in a few weeks and join us for our fourth keynote. Thank you.